You're welcome back. This is Newsfile, and this is your special edition. This is Joy Change Speaker Series, Diaspora edition. Leila says, I like it. Great lineup of speakers. Thumbs up to Kofi Koranting and all the speakers. Well done to the team for putting this super group together. Shamima Muslim says, it's been a brilliant morning of thought-provoking presentations. Ibrahim's work is truly important, and when an individual's vision can be potentially transformational, one wonders governments continue to fail its people and at worst frustrate those you truly want to contribute. Let's continue to give these people the opportunity to share. Let's get straight to our next speaker. She's been decorated globally. And I say global citizens for a good reason. Nana Oforiatta Ayim, Ofosuaa Oforiatta Ayim, is a writer, filmmaker, and art historian who lives and works here in Accra, Ghana. So you ask the question, what do we mean when we say Diaspora edition? We're talking about people who have interacted with the globe. She's founder of the NO Institute of Art and Knowledge, through which she has pioneered a Pan-African cultural encyclopedia, a mobile museum project, and curated Ghana's first pavilion at the Venice Biennale. She published her first novel, The Godchild, with Bloomsbury in 2019, and with Penguin in German in 2021. She has produced award-winning films for museums such as the Tate Modern, LACMA, and the New Museum, and lectures a course on history and theory at the Architectural Association in London. She was a 2018 Global South Visiting Fellow at Oxford University and was appointed to the Advisory Council of Oxford University's Cultural Program in 2020. She has accomplished. I'd like to pause here. She speaks to us on a future integrated educational and cultural landscape. Nana, thank you very much for making time to be with us on Joy Change Speaker Series.
Hi, thank you for having me. And thank you to all my fellow speakers as well for their contributions.
Great. We are happy and Ghanaians are excited watching and listening to these refreshing presentations that cause us to reflect and to also look deep into ourselves and see what we can do to improve our circumstances. Please, let's hear you.
Okay, so I'll just speak a little bit about the work that I've done because I'm sure many people on here don't know or not familiar with the work that I'm doing. So I have an organization in Ghana that's based between Accra and Ebri. It's called the NO Institute of Arts and Knowledge. And I started this institution at quite a young age, 21 years ago now. At the time, I was studying African art history in London. And at the time, African arts was still termed as primitive, as, fetish. We still had exhibitions of so-called primitive arts. When you went to exhibitions of African arts in, the metropolis of America, of Europe, it was often in glass cases. There were no descriptions. It was just, object from West Africa. All of the contemporary, at the time, contemporary art, African art was just beginning to be shown in mainstream institutions, but they were all under the banner of African art exhibitions. There weren't any really showcases of individual artists. They weren't contextualized. And so my aim very much when I started this institution was to bring African art into the center of global discourse and to make it equal to any other art in the world. And also, when I would come home, I'm from Chebi in Achimabwakwa. When I would come home and I'd go to Afasia, like the Ohum, the Odwira, I would see that art was not separate from life. It was very integrated. It was very much part of life. And I wanted to bring this sense of oneness that we had developed over thousands of years into the art sphere, which to that point was very much in white cube spaces, galleries, etc. And so I started with the curation of exhibitions and making of films, first in London and then in Ghana. And I did this for about 15 years or so of curating, with every exhibition trying to move our art more and more into the center of global discourse, which kind of the pinnacle of which was the Ghana Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which Ibrahim Mahama was also part of. And it was a huge success. We had such an impact on the global world stage. But at this stage, I asked myself, it was almost like, because I'd been to the Venice Biennale when I'd first started my career. And at the time, there was one African pavilion for the whole continent of Africa. And it was on the margins, like half an hour walk from the main centers. And I said to myself, as a very young person at the time, one day I will do a pavilion here. It will be of Ghanaian art and it will be at the center. Once having achieved this, I began to question myself, because the impact then in Ghana, along with other things that were happening here at the time, was that the Ghanaian art scene became more successful, became more sustainable to a certain extent, but it was mimicking the structures of the West, which at the moment is the extreme commercialization and capitalization of the art world. And this was quite in contradiction to what actually had attracted me to the arts and to the culture, this sense of oneness of all things, this very kind of deep-rooted spiritual knowledge of self that was expressed through our cultural expression. And so I went back to the drawing board, which I had been doing anyway through the Pan-African Cultural Encyclopedia that Samson mentioned, and through a project that I had started, which I called the Mobile Museum Project, which was a project that took the museum into communities. As we all know, we have a national museum, which was closed for many, many years. And even when it's open, it speaks primarily to school children, to tourists, to those who already are familiar with art. And I really wanted to bring this idea of art, which is so much part of our culture, back into the community. Of course, it already exists there with things like the Afasia, but I wanted to create a kind of bridge between our classical and historical arts institutions and the contemporary ones that had been imported. With the Mobile Museum, I started delving deeper and deeper into our indigenous knowledge systems. I started working more closely with children and workshops, as well as community leaders and members. And had a lot, this was probably the most fulfilling of all the projects that I've done. And to me, the most successful. It maybe wasn't as loudly successful as some of the others, but in terms of engagement, in terms of exchange, in terms of co-working with community members, in terms of what we learned, there was so much there. And one of the things that kept resonating with me again and again, I started my journey as a cultural historian because I really felt that I had to go back and excavate what had been lost, what had been taken from us through the colonial encounter. In doing the work that I was doing and doing this excavation, I realized actually not so, of course, a lot had been taken, but a lot was still there. It wasn't that we had been robbed of our culture. It wasn't that we had been stripped. It wasn't that things had been taken away from us. It was that it had gone deeper underground, that it was more protected, and that within our knowledge systems, we had mechanisms of protection as well. And so I went again deeper and deeper into these indigenous knowledge systems, and I found some of them were incredibly structured. And some of them were incredibly sophisticated as well. They included things like, mathematics, science. They included knowledge of nature, knowledge of the mind, knowledge of the soul. They were so deep. They were so multifaceted. And I don't know how, any of you felt, but I do remember when I was a very young person at school, I felt very much that the schooling, and I went to very good schools. I'm very grateful for the education that my parents gave to me. But I did feel a sense of the education that I was getting was taking me further and further away from myself rather than back into myself, back into a kind of sense of being rooted in myself. And so I found that these indigenous knowledge systems that we had developed over thousands and thousands of years gave us a direct roadmap into a sense of dignity, a sense of self-knowledge, a sense of resonance. And, there were things that existed, for example, like schools for leaders, where leaders needed to go through steps of accountability in order to become the leaders that that the people deserved them to be. And obviously, we look at our kind of political landscape at the moment, and there's so much, especially from young people, there's so much unrest, there's so much thirst for accountability, there's so much thirst for connection. And if you look back into our indigenous knowledge systems, these systems are actually accounted for. And so the next step of my institution, we've had educational mechanisms like cultural leadership fellowships, we've had residencies, etc. But for us, the next step was really going further back and integrating some of these systems that we'd uncovered through our mobile museum project, through our culture encyclopedia project. And so we started with the building of a school, including a permaculture farm and indigenous agricultural methods. And with this school, we're really trying to pioneer a new pedagogy or new system that includes some of the things that, like I say, have not been lost, but have just gone underground. When you look back at the colonial papers that are readily available in archives, they're written very, very overtly that in order to control us better or to be able to rule us better, they had to destroy our cultural beliefs, our cultural values. I can't remember there's one very, very famous quote that once you take away their culture and their cultural values, you don't have to oppress them anymore. They'll learn to oppress themselves or something along those lines. And I feel like we are in this kind of moment in time right now. We've kind of moved out of the post-colonial moment or movement, that saw incredible writers like Ama Ete Edu and Efo Sutherland, etc., Otikwe Oke, that saw post-colonial thinkers like Kwame Nkrumah and J.B. Dankwa, and Kwame Jetchi and Kwesi Wiredu, all these people that were trying to make sense and trying to create a new future out of what, and also trying to connect with the past and trying to create new paradigms for a new future out of this post-colonial moment. But I feel like we've moved on from that now. We've moved on to reacting to the colonial moment into a very new paradigm that connects with a lot of movements that are happening across the global South. We see at the moment a deep, deep, deep failure of Western systems, whether it's of government, whether it's of economics, whether it's in the arts world. Things are just not working. They are no longer the seeming role models of civilization that they've posited themselves as for so long. And so what are the solutions within our own systems? And this is what we are now trying to not just excavate, but also codify and also put out into the world so that others may be able to build foundations on them. And again, I think we're doing that for people who are already, graduates and in the research stage, etc. But for me right now, the most important thing is going right to the beginning so that children that come in the future, our children, our children's children, don't have to climb the same mountains that we had to climb, that they can start at ground zero with a sense of self, with a sense of dignity, with a sense of connection, within our indigenous knowledge systems. Right now there's, everybody's talking about conservation, everybody's talking about, ecological protection. Within our indigenous knowledge systems, all of this was already written in, whether it's respect for Asasia, all different things. And so how do we excavate and codify these methodologies and present them to a new generation in a way that they can also connect with, because it's so deeply enshrined within our DNA and within our cells? That's in brief the work that I'm doing.
That's breathtaking. And from what you say, one can only say that it's a good feeling that all hope is not lost. For as long as our indigenous knowledge and the way many young people today are just getting into cultures without any caution. So that suggests to me that's a lot of hope for this country. So how are you going about these humongous projects? Because these must be intensive projects.
Yeah, they are. And I just want to add also that I'm not kind of advocating for a nostalgic, just looking at the past where everything was golden and everything was perfect. That's not what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for like a conscious excavation, taking what was good and leaving behind the things that are harmful. I'm not saying that, once upon a time, everything was perfect, but I'm saying that we shouldn't throw out everything that was of value because we tell ourselves it's evil or it's fetish or it's, whatever we've been indoctrinated into thinking about our own culture. And so in terms of the steps, I mean, I'm quite an ambitious person, and I have quite a lot of capacity within myself in terms of energy, in terms of ambition. I've built a lot of kind of resources and networks in terms of relationships across the world. And with all of that, I am trying to, and also I'm not doing short-term thinking. Like everything that I'm doing is really for future generations and is also rooted in the work of my ancestors. I'm not thinking about achieving everything that I'm achieving in my, whatever lifespan or lifetime that I have. For example, when I started the Pan-African Culture Encyclopedia, there was, people were asking, how are you doing a 54-volume encyclopedia? But I'm going to do what I can with it in the lifetime that I have, but I'm also trying to put in mechanisms that everything that I'm doing will outlive me. And that's also why I'm looking at working more with young people, because this is not for me, this work. It's not for my peers. It's for us, yes, and it's for our ancestors, and it's for the people that follow us.
And looking at some of the things that, how you've been recognized, you've been a recipient of various awards and honors, you've been named one of the Apollo 40 under 40, one of the 50 African trailblazers by the African Report, you one of 12 African women making history in 2016, and one of 100 women of 2020 by OK Africa. You received the 2015 Art and Technology Award. I have mentioned that. So how does someone with such an accomplishment say, let me go back to this small place and corner in Ghana and focus on the Anno Institute?
I mean, the accomplishments is not why you work, right? It's not the reason that you get up in the morning and do your work. I think, I'm driven by a desire, like a deep desire to, leave the world a better place than I entered it. I'm driven by a passion to, I see so much potential in this corner, like you say, of the world that I come from. In Ghana, I see so much beauty, I see so much potential. And every single day, that potential is not fulfilled. That beauty is kind of covered with muck and with dirt. And I'm like, but I see it. I see it underneath all of this. It's there and it's shining so bright. And I have some capacity and some potential to uncover that. And so why wouldn't I? Like, why wouldn't I get up every single day and do my utmost best to do that? All the kind of things that you get, it's nice in a way that your work is not sitting in a vacuum somewhere, not doing anything. It's nice, but that's not why you're doing the work that you're doing. It's almost, but I wouldn't say it's by the by, because it does encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. But the reason that I'm doing the work that I'm doing, and that I will continue doing it till I draw my last breath, is comes from something much deeper than that. And it's very connected to the soil that that I'm from.
Great. Thank you so very much. We are certain that many are inspired by the story you tell and for the things that you do. I'm receiving a number of messages on the back of your presentation, and I'm going to share them right after this break that we are going to. And Nana Ofosuaa Oforiatta Ayim, if you want to read a bit more about her, one thing I read about her that challenges me is that she was the principal investigator on the Action for Restitution to Africa program. She was awarded Woman of the Year award in Ghana in 2021. And guess what? She got the Dan David Prize, the world's biggest history prize, in 2022. We just showed you a publication of that a while ago. Thank you so very much for your time. We take a quick break. We'll return with our very final change speaker.